Sure.
Stand sit.
We can sit.
Everybody ready? Good afternoon.
Your name?
Sure. My name is Ken Irvin, K-E-N-E-R-V-I-N. This is Ken Cassidy.
K-E-N-C-A-S-A-D-A-Y.
And Doug O'Connell.
D-O-U-G-O''C-O-N-N-E-L-L.
Doug and I are the attorneys for Officer Taylor, both in the case that was indicted today and in his previous murder indictment for Mike Ramos. So we'd like to have Ken Cassidy, the president of the APA, say a few things.
Sure.
We'll say a few things and then take some questions.
All right. This seems to be a regular thing where I have to talk to the media about, to me, which is a horrendous political prosecution of our police officers. These officers responded to a mentally ill person running around with a knife, threatening himself and others. And this is a complete failure of the system because these officers and other officers have responded to the same gentleman with mental issues numerous times before this. On this occasion, the gentleman that was unfortunately shot charged at our officers with a knife, and unfortunately he was shot because the officers felt fear for their lives. One of the officers here over the past 2 years had been sent back to duty and has done a fantastic job. He's been at work for the past 2 years. You know, that tells you when the department sends you back to work that they don't think you've done anything wrong. And both these officers shot at the same time because they both feared for their life at the same time. This is really getting old with this new district attorney. He ran on prosecuting police officers and he's doing it unlawfully. There is no way in hell that someone that charges people with a knife that defend themselves should be prosecuted for murder. This is ridiculous and it's getting old. These officers did nothing wrong, and I can't wait for this to go to court if it ever makes it there, because a lot of cases that are being indicted by this DA he's having to apologize for and back away from. This is a clown crew that he's running over there at the DA's office. I have some respect for some of the people over there, but some of these people he's hiring were hired to do nothing but prosecute police officers. Yes, there are bad police officers that need to be prosecuted. These guys are heroes. These guys tried to defend themselves at the same time, fired at the same time because they feared for their life. Again, this is another political prosecution by DA Garza, and it's not going to be tolerated. And I think he and his brothers and sisters over there that love prosecuting police officers are going to be embarrassed when this case goes to trial, just like all the other ones. You know, there are a few cases that have been indicted that, you know, needed to be indicted, but there are several that are just an absolute joke where the officers did nothing wrong, and this is another one of those.
So this case occurred July 31st of 2019, so it's already over 2 years old. In this particular case, the government's own handpicked use of force expert, Dr. Howard Williams, told the DA's office that Officer Taylor's use of force was legally justified. And yet, the district attorney directed a grand jury investigation that resulted in indictments for murder. In this particular case, like we've seen before, the exculpatory evidence wasn't presented to the grand jury. Dr. Howard Williams was sitting outside the jury room, outside the grand jury, but the district attorney's office refused to let him testify. So here again, we have another case of exculpatory evidence being suppressed. You'll remember that a couple months ago, in the case of Greg Gentry, Officer Greg Gentry, the district attorney dismissed that case with great fanfare because he told us that there was exculpatory evidence that was not presented to the defense attorneys, Ken and I, prior to grand jury, and that same exculpatory evidence wasn't presented to the grand jury. And so we have the exact same situation here. So my question is, who gets fired this time? Because last time he fired an assistant DA for doing this exact thing. Who gets fired this time? When does Chris Taylor get an apology? And why does the district attorney continue to suppress exculpatory evidence? Ken?
Although it is not necessary and he has no obligation to present it, it's obviously the right thing to do. And he is consistently telling the public that he is presenting fair cases, presenting all sides of an event to get the correct result. And we know for a fact today that's not right. It is not true. And we spoke with Dr. Williams himself, who confirmed he told them this was a valid shooting, it was legal, it was justified, and he was not allowed to testify before the grand jury. So it's the same pattern, it's the same thing we've seen before, and it just shows this is not about justice, it is not about doing the right thing, fulfilling ethical responsibilities, it is about indicting police officers at any cost.
So we'll take a couple questions if you have some at this time.
Hey Ken, you may have already addressed this, but are officers Taylor and Crucia, are they still employed at APD currently?
Yes, they're both employed. Officer Taylor is on restricted duty without pay, and I believe today the chief decided to keep Officer Crucia on pay with all benefits, which is the right decision because he's been at work doing a fantastic job for the past 2 years.
Do you anticipate, I guess, the defense here saying that Chris Taylor has two indictments, two murder indictments, that is the pattern that he, of him as an officer, a pattern of murder?
Well, both of these cases, we fully expect to get acquittals. We can understand to some degree, why the case involving Michael Ramos was indicted. We have no understanding of how and why this case from July 31st, 2019 was indicted. There's never been a more clear-cut, legally justified officer-involved shooting in Travis County history.
I'd like to answer that too. Yeah. I think what there's a pattern here is of malicious prosecution. The DA ran on prosecuting Chris Taylor, and he's done that. Before you ever saw the evidence or knew all the facts of the investigation, he ran a campaign on prosecuting Chris Taylor, and he's done that.
Ken, have you been in conversation with Chief Chacon about the latest indictment?
We spoke a little bit this morning, but what I just found out through another source of a commander in our police department is that Officer Crucia is being left on administrative duty with pay.
We've got some valid concerns, and maybe Ken's the better one to speak to this, but what happened in this case was this man had a knife. Police were called, police came and addressed it, took an elevator up to the floor that he was on, and when the elevator doors opened, he was there. He was 7 to 8 feet away by our officer's witness account. Was told repeatedly to drop the knife, and he did not. He refused. Instead, he started moving toward the officers, closing the distance toward them, and the officers waited until he was 3 to 4 feet away with the knife, as well within striking range with the knife, before they had to defend themselves using lethal force. They didn't want to do it, but they had to, and they did, and it was because this man refused to drop the knife and put them in grave danger. The issue here is, going forward, what officers are going to do now faced with this reality that coming 3 feet close to you with a knife apparently is not enough. They need to come closer. Or perhaps Mr. Garza would prefer them to just go ahead and get stabbed first prior to using any sort of force to defend themselves. And so we're nervous that we're going to have officers out on the street in situations like this where they need to defend themselves and they don't, or they need to defend a third person and they don't, because they're worried they're going to be next. I must get hurt first, otherwise it's going to be bad for me.
And think about this, I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
Go ahead.
Think about this, if you're a young person interested, a high-quality young person interested in a career in law enforcement, do you come to Austin, Texas to work, or do you go to some other city? Because the message that this district attorney and others are repeatedly broadcasting is we don't respect the police, we don't trust the police, we don't like the police, and they're doing everything they can to ensure that we get a police department that is made up of inferior candidates. It's like Ken said, what's the new standard? You have to be stabbed first before you can use force to defend yourself? That's not consistent with the law.
And one thing, we all wear bulletproof vests on duty. The one thing a bulletproof vest won't stop is a knife. And I want the community and you as reporters to understand that. We're trained in a certain way, and a knife is a dangerous weapon that can kill you very fast. We've had officers, one of my good friends here in the department slashed in the throat and he barely made it. They are very dangerous weapons, and that's why we're trained the way we are, is because, for one, our bulletproof vest cannot stop a knife.
Ken, in some of these instances, officer-involved shootings, we've seen, like just last week, the taser was deployed, and and then that subject there, he didn't die. Why not a taser in this moment now, and why the use of lethal force? I don't know if that's a question for you, Ken, or.
I'm not even sure whether they had their tasers out at that time, but I can tell you that our officers are highly trained. We go through dozens and dozens of practicals that are just similar to this. We just had a shooting last week where the guy charged the officer. So these are grave concerns that we have with the attitude of this district attorney, because we have officers out there putting their lives on the line every day, and yet they have to worry about being prosecuted for following their training. Again, Chief Manley at the time would have thought that these officers did something wrong. He would have put them on restricted duty at that time, and that didn't happen. In fact, Officer Christopher has been at work for the last 2 years, pushing a police car and answering 911 calls and doing a fantastic job. So I'm sure that weighed on Chief Chacon's decision to leave him on administrative duty with pay today.
To your question, I don't have the answer because we haven't seen any evidence yet. But I do know that Howard Williams, Dr. Howard Williams, not only is he an expert in use of force generally, but he's an expert in the use of tasers. He's highly regarded as a taser expert. He's published a couple books about tasers. That would have been a great question that the grand jurors could have asked him if he had only been allowed to testify. And so I'm left wondering, why didn't they want him to testify to the grand jury?
We believe he would have testified that while a taser is an extremely valuable tool, it has its place, and it has times where it is not the appropriate tool. And when you have somebody within 3 to 4 feet of you with a knife advancing toward you, that is a lethal threat. That is not a time to use a taser. When they work, they're great, but the reality is they don't work all the time.
They have a high failure rate, and a lot of people don't know that. The tasers have a high failure rate. They try not to even use them downtown anymore because they just don't work like they should.
So this would not have been an appropriate circumstance to use the taser with this threat advancing towards you.
Y'all mentioned talking with Dr. Williams. About when did that conversation take place?
Yesterday.
Yesterday? And just so I'm clear.
Well, so let me give you a more precise answer. We met with Dr. Williams about a variety of cases back in July. And during that conversation, we asked him about the case involving Officer Chris Taylor. Yesterday, after we found out that Officer Taylor was indicted, we called him in order to confirm, wait, did we understand what you said correctly? Did you tell us this? Because Chris Taylor's now indicted, and we don't understand how that could be possible. Because you're the government's handpicked expert, and you told him it was a legally justified use of force. So can you help us understand? And so the answer to your question is July and yesterday.
And in that conversation yesterday, he said that the DA prevented him from offering this testimony to the grand jury?
No, that's not what I said. What I said was he was outside the grand jury room, and we know he didn't testify before the grand jury. But, so to complete that thought, and I think you understand this, you can't just walk into a grand jury room and start talking. You have to be summoned into the grand jury by the district attorney.
Right.
No, we know that wasn't done.
Was he outside that room because he had been indicted? Why was he outside that room?
Yeah, so I didn't ask him that question. I don't want to speak for him, but I think it's reasonable to conclude he was called there to testify, and somehow a decision was made by someone, perhaps the district attorney, not to allow him to testify.
And can you just educate
These are good questions that you need to ask Jose Garza, right? I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure I understand Dr. Williams' background. Can you tell us where he works, what he does?
So Dr. Williams currently is a faculty member at Texas State University. Prior to that, I'm going to give you the condensed version. His resume is long. Prior to that, he was the police chief of San Marcos. Prior to that, he was Austin Police Commander.
And he's an author. He wrote a book about the use of tasers, and he's conducted extensive studies specifically relating to deaths caused by tasers.
And just to clarify, you said this man had altercations with police before, or police knew about him, is that correct?
From what I understand, he had a very extensive history of mental illness.
Okay. Do you know if they knew that going in, that this was that person?
I don't know if they knew that, but I know from talking to other officers that they had been out there before dealing with them.
Okay.
Hey, Ken, in the civil suit, in the filing, the family's attorney filed, they alleged that a mental health officer was available to respond to this call on July 31st, 2019, but just didn't for some reason. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. I'm not surprised that happened because you don't always know that when you're dispatched that you're dealing with that type of call. I asked the officers today, I'm like, do you remember what you were dispatched to? And they said it was a man with a knife call, which is a hotshot priority call. So I'm not even sure they knew who they were dealing with at that time.
When the call is that there is a man walking around this residential condominium with a knife, if he's having a psychiatric issue, absolutely you would want a mental health officer to respond if possible. But that knife is going to supersede everything else. You have to ensure safety. People have to be safe. The man with the knife cannot hurt anybody, whether he's having a psychiatric episode or not. So it's important that police get there rapidly to make him safe, to prevent him from harming somebody else. And that happened. They responded quickly. They tried to take care of the threat, but they were not given the chance to do that. He advanced toward them, and within a matter of seconds, it was over. So I don't even know what a mental health officer in this situation, if it would have made any difference at all.
Tony, questions?
And one thing that I would like to say is that these officers, well, all of us, I have, and the two officers involved have had very extensive mental health training. That's required by state law. So everybody on patrol now in the city of Austin has very extensive training in mental health. It used to not be that way. It used to be you were selected to go to that school. Now everybody gets that training.
Right, so I think they were hired in like 2015, 16, around then, they would have got that
They
training.
would have.
Could you talk a little bit more about what that training
Sure, it's a
is?
required 40 hours. I received it many years ago. I was actually a mental health officer for the Austin Police Department. I actually work in a mental health ward now on my duty job, where people are brought there to, in emergency. And I can tell you that, you know, the hospitals do the best they can, but it's a daily grind there where officers bring in people that are in mental health crisis. They treat you for a few hours and they send you back home. It's a constant, just no one in the state to me gets the treatment that they need. There's just not enough money. We continually put people in on a yearly basis that are mental health challenges. They have serious issues, you know, ideations and other issues that we consistently put in to the hospital. The officers know who they are, and there's people we put in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times a year. They go in and then they just get right back out, and that's very possible what happened to this gentleman. I know it's a long, extensive history of mental health issues. Any other questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Well, that's the other one. So, which one, you don't wanna do it for the first day? Oh, okay. So, yeah, so, just doesn't, I don't know.